A film went on to earn more than $100 million worldwide, and more than 4 decades later,
There's a meteorite that hit the ground near here. I want to check it out. It won't take long. Steady. Great.
it is still regularly ranked as the finest entry in one of the most successful franchises in cinema history. Guess which film is it? The film is Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, and its story starts with a director who chose to walk away from the very franchise he had created. After the pressure of directing the original Star Wars in 1977, George Lucas made a deliberate decision not to direct its sequel himself. Instead, he handed directing duties to Irvin Kershner and turned his own attention toward expanding industrial light and magic, the visual effects company he had built to solve problems no other studio could handle. Lucas also made a financial decision that carried enormous personal risk.
And I began to go back and deal with the stories that evolved to get us to that point, and that, it's hard to say really where the, how it evolved.
Rather than allow 20th Century Fox to fully finance the production and retain creative control over the outcome, Lucas chose to self-finance the sequel using profits from the first film, combined with a bank loan secured against his own assets. It was an unusual arrangement for a Hollywood sequel of that scale, and it meant that if the film failed, the financial consequences would fall almost entirely on Lucas personally, rather than on a studio balance sheet. Now, the obvious question is why anyone, having already achieved massive success with the first film, would take on that level of personal financial exposure for the follow-up. So, the principal photography began in March of 1979, opening with location work near Finse, Norway, for the ice planet sequences set on Hoth. During filming, the crew was hit by what has been described as one of the worst blizzards in 50 years, a storm severe enough to confine much of the production to a nearby hotel for several days and damage equipment in the process. Rather than treat the storm purely as a setback, Kershner used the blizzard itself to film Luke Skywalker's opening scene crawling through the snow, adding a level of authentic environmental texture that would have been difficult to fake on a soundstage. The sequence was shot close enough to the crew's hotel that, according to Mark Hamill, onlookers could be seen watching from their balconies with drinks in hand, while the actors endured the actual storm below. The Norway shoot was only the beginning of a production that ran into repeated and serious complications. An electrical fire had already damaged one of the sound stages at EMI Elstree Studios in England weeks before filming moved there, forcing the crew to work around the aftermath.
Humanoids are the norm, so really it's the hardest thing is trying to keep it very just off the cuff.
During the shoot itself, Mark Hamill broke his thumb performing a stunt. Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford both fell ill at different points, and director Irvin Kershner was struck in the head by a cable gun on set. A full day's worth of footage was reportedly lost by accident and had to be reshot. Most seriously, production designer John Barry, who had helped shape the visual identity of the original film, died of meningitis during production, a loss that affected the crew deeply in the middle of an already difficult shoot. That raises a real question about how a production absorbing that many setbacks managed to stay on track at all. The answer is that in some ways, it did not.
Are those your real movie boots?
No.
3 years later, everybody comes back to work, and everybody's sort of more enthusiastic than they were the first time.
What had been planned as a 12-week shoot stretched to roughly 27 weeks, and the budget climbed well past its original estimate, with figures from different accounts placing the final cost anywhere between $18 million and just over $30 million. Lucas later placed much of the blame for the overages on Kershner and producer Gary Kurtz, arguing they were taking too long on individual scenes, and he found himself flying to London repeatedly during production, simply to keep the schedule under control. Lucas would eventually admit that part of the responsibility for the budget growth rested with his own decision not to stay more directly involved earlier in the process. The tension between Lucas and Kurtz over the production never fully resolved, and Kurtz left Lucasfilm entirely by the end of that same year.
They couldn't get the train in there, so Harrison couldn't get on the set, until a week later. So they could barely shoot. We shot like 20 feet outside the hotel.
Behind the visible production troubles, the screenplay itself had already been through a difficult journey before a single frame was shot. Lee Brackett, the writer originally brought on to script the sequel, died shortly after delivering her first draft, leaving Lucas to work through a subsequent version himself before Lawrence Kasdan came on board to shape the script that would eventually reach the screen. Few sequels in Hollywood history have been built on a foundation this unstable, with a departed screenwriter, an over-budget shoot nearly triple its planned length, and a director working through the death of a key collaborator, and still gone on to be remembered as a landmark rather than a cautionary tale. If the production side of the story sounds chaotic, the film's central twist required a different kind of discipline entirely, one built around secrecy rather than damage control.
I am your father. No. No. It's not true.
The scene in which Darth Vader reveals himself to be Luke Skywalker's father was protected with a level of deception rare even by blockbuster standards. During filming, the cast and much of the crew worked from a version of the script in which Vader's line was written as an accusation that Obi-Wan Kenobi had killed Luke's father, a completely different reveal from what ultimately appeared on screen. Actor David Prowse, who performed Vader physically on set, delivered that false line during filming and was never told the actual dialogue that would later be dubbed in by James Earl Jones. Mark Hamill was one of only a small handful of people let in on the real twist, informed directly by Kershner just days before the scene was shot, specifically so that his on-camera reaction would be genuine.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
According to Hamill, most of the rest of the cast, including Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, did not learn the actual line until they sat in the audience at the film's premiere in 1980, alongside the general public. Reporters at the time even attempted to fly a helicopter over the Norwegian set to photograph what they believed might be secret alien vehicles, capturing nothing more than ordinary snowmobiles. When The Empire Strikes Back finally opened on the 21st of May 1980, it became the highest-grossing film of that year, eventually pulling in figures widely reported between $540 million and $550 million worldwide, with roughly $290 million of that coming from North America alone.
289J, take 8.
I liked the Han and Leia love scene in the Millennium Falcon. We didn't know how that was going to work, and I think that came off very well.
Lucas recovered his personal investment within roughly 3 months of release and later shared close to $5 million in bonuses with employees who had worked on the production, a gesture well outside typical Hollywood norms for how sequel profits were distributed at the time. What is often left out of retrospectives is that the film's initial critical reception was far from unanimous. Unlike the original Star Wars, which had been met with near universal enthusiasm, The Empire Strikes Back drew a genuinely mixed response on release. Some critics and portions of the audience were unsettled by the film's darker tone, its unresolved cliffhanger ending, and character choices that departed from the lighter adventure formula the first film had established. A portion of fans reportedly placed the blame for that shift directly on Kershner and Kasdan, accusing them of drifting away from the spirit of Lucas's original vision, rather than crediting the choice as a deliberate creative risk. It took time, repeated viewings, and the completion of the trilogy for critical and popular consensus to shift decisively in the film's favor. That gradual reassessment is part of what makes its current reputation notable.
Yes, Captain.
I think we've got something, sir.
The film did not arrive already crowned as a classic. It earned that status and eventually placed above its predecessor in most rankings of the series and, frequently, in rankings of American cinema as a whole. The visual and technical work behind the film also carried consequences that extended well past the production itself. Industrial Light and Magic's contributions, including the stop-motion animation used to bring the AT-AT walkers to life and the intricate matte work built for the Cloud City sequences, earned a Special Achievement Academy Award and helped establish techniques that influenced effects-driven filmmaking for years afterward.
Group 7 and 10 will stay behind to fly the speeders. As soon as each transport is loaded, evacuation control will give clearance for immediate launch.
Right, sir.
Stuart Freeborn's design for the Yoda puppet, performed and voiced by Frank Oz, introduced a character built almost entirely through practical craftsmanship rather than any of the shortcuts a rushed production might have otherwise reached for. Taken together, the film's legacy rests on an unusual combination of factors rarely found together in a single production: a director who deliberately stepped back from directing duties, a financing structure that put one filmmaker's personal wealth directly on the line, a shoot marked by a fatal illness, a life-threatening blizzard, on-set injuries, and a departed original screenwriter, a central plot twist protected through outright deception on set, and a critical reception that only became a consensus of greatness over time, rather than arriving fully formed on opening weekend.
A milestone in science fiction fantasy. Gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to present you with these special awards.
The gap between the film's treatment at the time and its reputation today is worth stating plainly. At the Academy Awards following its release, The Empire Strikes Back won for sound mixing and received a Special Achievement Award for its visual effects. Yet, it received no nomination for Best Picture or Best Director, a distinction the original Star Wars had managed to secure 3 years earlier.
In the production of every film, there is a group of technicians whose sole job it is to bring to realization the writer's fancy, the director's vision, and the producer's dream.
By most contemporary industry measures, the sequel was treated as a technical achievement rather than a serious awards contender. That assessment did not hold. Decades later, the American Film Institute placed the film among the 10 greatest movies in American cinema history, and in a 2014 poll of more than 250,000 readers conducted by Empire magazine, The Empire Strikes Back was voted the greatest movie of all time across any genre, ahead of The Godfather in second place, The Dark Knight in third, and titles including The Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction rounding out the top 5. A film denied major awards recognition on release had, within a generation, been placed by audiences above nearly every other work in the history of the medium.
Hundreds of skilled technicians and artists contributed thousands of painstaking hours to bring the magic of The Empire Strikes Back to the screen.
Few productions have traveled that particular distance, from a troubled shoot dismissed by some critics as a disappointing follow-up, to a film cited decades later as the high point, not just of its own franchise, but of American filmmaking generally. The Empire Strikes Back continues to be discussed that way, decades after a production that, at almost every stage, looked far less certain of its own success than the finished film ultimately suggested.